Right. Hello, viewers. We are recording a new episode for our podcast today. With me, I have Miranda Layton and Joe Harrigan. Joe has been on this podcast before. I think he was on last year, and this is Miranda's first time. Today, we'll be talking about the death of the Queen, not not Beyonce, Elizabeth II, who died in September, and we will talk about how the world reacted to that and how the media, the British media in particular, gauged the public mood and how the public in general reacted to the death and to the events that followed in the weeks afterwards. So let me start with Miranda. Um, what was your reaction when you got the news? Like, I remember my reaction. So I was in Paris that evening, and I was literally, I think, at the Eiffel Tower or near the Eiffel Tower having a meal, and I opened Facebook, and a friend of mine said something strange, and like I saw that a friend of mine had made a post which talked about the Queen, and then there was an RIP. I was like, wait a second, has something happened? And then I just saw that okay, something has happened, and that was it. Like I didn't really um, envisage what was about to happen in the next few weeks. And the very next day, as I was on my bus back to Germany, where I live, I was so frustrated with the way people were reacting. I was really hungry for a chat with someone who was at least moderately Republican, and I could only find Joe on list of people who were online. And yeah, so anyway, Miranda, what was your first reaction?
I think it's interesting, like looking back to how I felt. I think at the time I'd been very caught up in the drama of it. I remember seeing loads of news updates about it and being like, oh my God, something really big is happening. Because I think no matter your kind of political allegiance or your views on the monarchy, you have to acknowledge that like the Queen was she has a very big impact on our culture. So I think that's what I was like quite the drama of it, to be honest, which sounds terrible. I wasn't rejoicing her death, but I was, yeah. I think there was a lot of like, oh, what's going on? And then when she did die, I initially just didn't really feel anything. And I think it was looking at the news and looking at people's social media posts that then made me think, oh, am I sad about this? And then I think when I went out that night, I remember seeing on the bus stops in London, they'd put lots of posters of the Queen on them all, and I think that also was making me more like, it was an artificial sadness. And then I think then after about 12 hours I sort of came to my senses, and I just thought, okay, this is, yeah, I'm not really that sad, and I don't really understand this sort of mass hysteria and public outpouring. Yeah.
But did the mass hysteria surprise you?
No, I guess because I wasn't alive for Diana, but you read about how people reacted to her death. And I think I just think it seemed very, I think in the middle of like a time of very major political and economic turmoil in terms of like the world we live in, it just seemed, this grief seemed so misplaced when I think there's so many other things in this world going on that people should be channeling their energy towards.
Something more deserving of it. Yeah. Joe, what was your first reaction when you got the news? And where were you when you got the news? Because you are a journalist yourself, like, so I would be interested in knowing where were you.
I didn't hear the news as such. I heard that the news might be happening, which is around about, I think it'd be midday or 1 o'clock-ish, 1 o'clock in the afternoon that day. We got the word from our central team that it looked quite likely it had happened, and that we all had to be ready for it when it was confirmed that it had done. So I don't mind telling you now that we got the stories and tributes in place, as in written, interviewed the relevant people in our batch before we had it confirmed that she wasn't back then. So we had to conduct conversations and do it in such a way as if we already knew, when in reality we didn't. And obviously, it's very strange doing that, because you're aware that you're still discussing it in hypothetical terms, but you have to treat it as if it's already real. And everyone is a bit worried because it's the sort of thing where if you put the foot wrong, it can potentially get you in a lot of trouble, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're asking how I felt about it at the time, on a professional level, it is quite exciting when big things happen and you're a part of it. You know, it creates buzz, creates excitement. You know, you even get adrenaline pumping. On a personal level, I've never, as you know, I've never been a monarchist. Never been particularly interested in the royal family. It didn't really impact on me in that sense. I mean, you do get a sense of major events happening. You're aware that this is something historic and that you're living through it. But I can't say I felt a sense of loss personally.
Yeah. I wasn't exactly mistaking you for Camilla Tomini or someone like that, but yeah, I got that drift. The one thing that was bothering me a lot within the first full day, like immediately after the announcement of the death, was the way many people I knew, like people of my age, people I sort of studied with, worked with in the UK, were reacting to what was going on. And most of them were making posts on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram that looked like, well, it looked like they were all, singing from the same hymn sheet.
This why
Like
you sought me out on that day, because you're looking for someone who you thought wasn't.
exactly. No, well, that was the morning after, but this kept happening all the way into the weekend. I think the death happened on a Thursday, and
Yeah, it was hang on.
Thursday, yeah,
yeah, you're right. It was on the
British.
Thursday,
Yeah.
and then it was into the
No,
Friday.
so the thing is, like, when you see these people who are fairly, like, well-rounded mentally, they don't really slavishly admire anything for that matter. Why do you think, I mean, I can start with Miranda again for this. Why do you think there is always this exception when it comes to the monarchy? Or was it more the case that it was an exception for this monarch in particular? To mean that, I mean, what I mean to say is, like, when King Charles dies, maybe there will be no exception of that kind.
I think you have to take into account that she was the longest reigning monarch. Like, I remember reading an article that said that she'd been such a constant in people's lives. So I understand to lose that constant could be destabilizing for some people. And I guess it also is that thing where, because she was alive and the figurehead of this institution, you couldn't really ever question or critically think that much about the royal family and the monarchy. So you would just sort of blindly accept the royal family and the sort of what they represent. And then I think her passing is sort of, yeah, all these people who just sort of accept the monarchy, accept colonialism, and the loss of the constant means that it kind of culminates in this mass hysteria and people thinking that she's their grandma, and thinking like they know her.
Joe?
Well, I think you're right. What you said to start with, which is that when Charles dies, there won't be the same reaction. People just don't feel about him in the same way. And as Miranda just said then, I think the sense of constancy is what underpinned a lot of the feeling behind the Queen. Generations and generations of people in this country can't remember anyone else there. They can't remember a time before she was Queen. She was crowned in 1953, I think.
Six or five? Yeah.
I'm fairly sure it was early 50s. But yeah, so well over 70 years, most people can't remember a period before she was the monarch. And so it does create this, for a lot of people, this strange sense of intimacy. I didn't, but if a lot of people grew up, for example, watching the Queen's speech at Christmas, taking part in Jubilee events and the like, it creates an artificial sense of closeness, as if she is part of the family, which she isn't, of course, but that's the way a lot of people felt.
Yeah, I would go one step further and say that it had something to do with her personality or with her personally, in the sense that if it was, let's say, a male person, a male monarch who had been in power for 70 years or 60 plus, 50 plus years, however long, and same, like all the things that we're talking about, like a constant across cultures, generations, lives, all these things would still have been true, but maybe the fact that he would have been a male person
there
wouldn't
have
have
been
wouldn't have
there wouldn't have been the
helped.
same
Yeah,
sense of affection and sort of weird
quite possibly. Like,
I
I don't know.
think also because the Queen, you never really see her giving. You see her giving speeches, you never really see that much human interaction, and not many people have interacted with her. And because she is a feminine, she's in a feminine role. I mean, she's a woman. She has a female role. I think that's the perfect like people can just imprint their own ideas of what she's like and their own personality onto her. And then because she's a woman, she's going to be really caring and maternal just by like those assumptions we have in society.
Yeah,
there was a very strange period where people liked to imagine that she shared what their personal politics were, particularly before the final Brexit deal, whatever you want to call it. Do you remember that you saw on Twitter quite a lot, people liking to imagine to themselves that she was a secret EU supporter or she was a secret Brexit supporter on the other side?
Yeah.
Of course, she probably wasn't. We can never know that for sure. We don't know what she really thought. But you saw these people reading into these sort of coded signals they thought she was giving off. And similarly, when Donald Trump visited, there were people who liked to imagine that she was somehow throwing shade at him, as they said, which obviously she wasn't. I mean, it's hard to imagine that someone who was married to Prince Philip for the best part of half a century would have that much trouble, meeting with an elderly racist. But like, is that what you want? But it does speak to an interesting mentality that a lot of people had, even if they held quite liberal or left of centre viewpoints themselves. They somehow had to imagine that somehow this hereditary monarch would feel the same way as they did, or share similar viewpoints.
That is interesting, because if you just go back, let's say 25 years, in 97, when Diana died, wasn't there like a period of time of a week or so when the approval ratings of the monarchy went like took a nosedive, because and that had everything to do with how the Queen then wasn't like showing the kind of emotions that people were expecting her to show in the aftermath of Diana's death. So the point that Miranda was making, I think, is very pertinent here, in the sense that people are always trying to project certain kinds of like scrupulous emotions or scrupulous, I'm not even sure if scrupulous should be the correct word here, but like they're always trying to project certain kinds of emotions or personalities or beliefs or opinions on the figurehead of the monarch. And in that case, it wasn't quite happening. And as a result of that, approval ratings were going down. But of course, there was this other figure, Diana, for whom all these things were happening like quite extraordinarily. Although in that case, like in her case, in Diana's case, it wasn't the case that she wasn't interacting with people. Like no interaction wasn't the problem there. But anyway, let me go into a different question. What do you think this says about the outlook or the opinions, or I don't know, or the take that people usually have, or let's say latently have, on colonialism in general? Because I found it strange when I saw people who were very vocally anti-colonial, like like at the pub when talking about politics or when talking about foreign interventions. I found it strange when these people were sort of jumping on the bandwagon and posting things like she was a constant in our lives, blah blah blah. I mean, someone made this point, and actually Miranda and I were talking about this article, but I can't remember who it was. Maybe Sonia Soda or someone in the Guardian made this point. No, not Sonia Soda. Maybe Kenan Malik. The point that you can mourn the death of the person without, let's say, admiring the institution that they stood for. It is always possible, but very few people were actually keen on making that distinction. So Miranda, do you have anything to add here, like on the colonial angle?
I mean, I don't think there was a lot of nuance, to be honest, in much of the media that I read, apart from maybe a few Guardian articles. And I think probably it is because the press are kind of scared, but then I suppose it was maybe a bit disappointing, because I would have expected there to be, like, I don't know, just, it's not, I don't think it's disrespectful to think about what someone lived through and what they contributed to in terms of the world when they die. Like when someone dies, you find out all sorts of things, and it's important to discuss them. I guess it is just because the royal family must continue, and we must continue to have, the monarchy as a structure that, upholds our society. That probably limited the amount of discussion that we could have about things like colonialism, the monarchy's like contribution to colonialism, and how like the Queen was kind of the figurehead of these, structures, which is, I don't know, a shame, but
Yeah.
Well, there was a strange sort of overcorrection on the other side, where if you sort these things out, you could find takes from alternative media sites and Twitter threads by academics and people who did point out the role that the royal family played in colonialism and imperialism. But in a sense, some of them took it a bit too far, where to read them, you would think that she had actually done these things personally, where it didn't really make a lot of sense. And again, there wasn't very much nuance. I mean, I'm well aware that she plays a role as a figurehead of an institution that has done a lot of damage around the world in various places. I mean, if you inhabit the same sort of online circles I do, you could find a lot of people from nationalist Republican communities in Northern Ireland who would point out the popular saying that she knighted the commander of the unit that carried out the Bloody Sunday killings. That's true, but he wasn't knighted for that. And while it might prompt us to ask questions about that whole honour system and about the role that the state played, the fact is, we know who carried out those killings, and who we might blame for it. And it distorts the issue a bit to seem as if she was somehow personally masterminding it. When you saw people making similar points about Kenya, about the Mau Mau insurrections, about events in Aden in the 50s in Cyprus and the like. And again, the same argument I think applies. That yes, it's worth thinking about the role the monarchy plays in acting as the figurehead for it, but this kind of overdone or overcorrection to act as if somehow she had personally masterminded it all is very, very strange. And I don't think so.
I think it comes down. Yeah, sorry.
I mean, I definitely think. I also saw things on Twitter and sort of things on like Novara Media and stuff about the Queen. I did sort of, there was a lot of like sort of misinformation being spread, and a lot of sort of, misblaming the Queen. But I just think, the mainstream media was too much skewed to like, we love the Queen, which really doesn't reflect public opinion probably that accurately. And then in the more sort of fringe media outlets, you're getting like, well, we all hated the Queen and she did all these terrible things, which I think is very typical of this really black and white discourse that seems to be going on completely all the time in our current sort of news.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Novara Media. I don't know if you saw that story about the teacher who was allegedly suspended in Scotland for questioning the role of the Queen immediately after her death. But the interesting thing about that story is that in any mainstream outlet, it wouldn't, just purely on levels of competence, it wouldn't pass muster. There's no real sources to it. The teacher wasn't named or identified. None of the sources were named or identified, and there's basically no evidence to back it up. It might have happened, and it might not. We have no way of knowing. Or it may have been completely different to how it was reported. So again, although I'd share the frustration with the mainstream narrative that everyone loved her and everyone was devastated, I don't think the solution to that is to immediately just take the exact opposite view and pretend that there was the complete consensus in the opposite direction.
That is, I mean, I was going to say
the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I was going to say on colonialism in general, like nuance is of great value. Like, and whenever I see people talking about colonialism in general, colonialism like as a broad subject, and they don't take into account. Well, let's take a very concrete example. So let's take Hong Kong. So Hong Kong passed into like its current political state in '97. It was sort of like the last. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say it was the last British colony, but anyway, so like Hong Kong is a very interesting example because to this day, whenever there are, let's say, excesses on China's side happening in Hong Kong, people who are citizens of Hong Kong, they are always full of praises for the British system. Many of them are too keen on coming to the UK, settling in the UK, you don't get that with many other former colonies. Uh, I don't know, Canada, India, Pakistan. You don't quite get that. But what I'm trying to say is nuances of essence when it comes to talking about colonialism or talking about any complicated subject. And with the Queen or with any monarch, almost axiomatically, it becomes important to note that although, as Joe was saying, like most of these things were not personally, let's say, approved by the monarch or but personally done by the monarch. Many of them were done in the name of the monarchy. So when people portion blame to the institution of monarchy, they might not be off by a big margin, but of course, like you have to take it case by case and be very, yeah, sorry?
They're not off by a big margin, but it is just quite, yeah.
It can be disingenuous, yeah.
Yeah, a bit disingenuous to act as if it was, done by personal sort of.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you have the opposite side of the spectrum as well, where I've seen sort of TikToks by American teenagers who act as if she personally, decriminalized homosexuality in the 60s, which was it's an incredible sort of personal growth of someone of her generation to do that. I mean, well, no, she didn't. That was
yeah.
Jenkins and others.
Sure. Right. I want to move to some of the reactions that followed in the weeks, or some of the things that happened in the weeks afterwards. So Miranda, you live in London. So you were at the sort of city where the queue was happening. What was your reaction? Like, what were you thinking when you saw the queue for the first time? Like, did you ever see the queue in person? Number one, and number two, like, what was that all about? Like in general, I live in Germany now, and people here couldn't believe what was happening because like they just had no idea. Like the German news outlets, whenever they were reporting on the queue, they sounded as ridiculous as they could because they were literally reporting on facts. But if you just looked at it without looking at the pictures or without having an idea of what's happening in London, you would have thought that it was an Onion article.
Yeah, no, it was. I think the popularity was there was definitely people going because they adored the Queen. I think a lot of people were queuing just to be a part of history. I don't. Yeah, it was quite. I mean, I think again, it's just this hysteria thing. I do sort of have some understanding and empathy of the people who queued for the history thing.
Did you go?
I didn't go, but my mum went and she queued for 12 hours or something.
Oh my God.
And then went to work the next day. So yeah, definitely really, ridiculous things.
But logistically speaking, how does one queue for 12 hours? Like, do you take food with you? Do you take like a moving toilet?
I think they must have had loos along the way. But I think she took food with her.
Okay. And Joe, did you go to London to cover the queue or to be in the queue?
The queue, no. I think when I was looking at some of the reactions to the queue, one of the things that struck me about it was that, in a way, it might sound strange, but it was quite reminiscent of the 2012 Olympics. Stay with me here. Stay with me. In that there was this narrative around it of this sort of constructed air of national unity, as in the entire country had come together to take part in this big spectacle. And I can't quite explain how or put it into words, but there was this strange air of sort of kind of twee British niceness to it, which was the overwhelming sort of atmosphere to it all. And I think, again, much like the 2012 Olympics, that's not necessarily the reality of how most people are living at the time.
Yeah, I think it's very much like a sort of Great British Day Out to go and stand on queue. Like I think my mum said there were people with camping chairs who'd brought like drinks, and it was like obviously people had gone to pay respects, but there was also an element of like, oh, this is a fun thing to do, like a bit of amusement.
Yeah, and also I think since you mentioned the 2012 Olympics, like austerity was at its peak when that was happening. So people were like, there were lots of reasons for people to be unhappy about like money, unhappy about their lives, unhappy about like things beyond their control. And similarly now there was COVID, like there was, I mean, there were like this cost of living crisis and lots of other things. And also did the 2012 Olympics help in any concrete sense? Because wasn't there like this? I mean, did it help in concrete sense in fostering like a sense of national unity? Like I remember, I wasn't living in the UK at that time, like in 2012, but I do remember watching the opening ceremony and being quite moved by how uh, low key and also incredible it was at the same time. Like it went into great depth at showing the NHS, at showing lots of other things. And because we were like, I was living in India at the time, and we remember the 2008 opening ceremony very well. And we were like, come on, they can't top that. And we saw something that was really very, very different in flavor and in appeal, and it was still very moving. And the thing is, like, the Olympics go on for a few weeks. Uh, so this sense of national unity, did that stay for a few weeks, or was it just like a thing that happened momentarily and then went away? Oh, and similarly, like to draw an analogy to what happened in September, like how did that sense of national unity prevail, or did it prevail? And if it did, for how long? What do you think? Yeah.
That's a tough one. I think in terms of the Olympics, it's overstated the impact. I think most people were broadly positive about it at the time. And if it did, emphasize popular support for the NHS, the welcoming in of the Windrush generation, things like that were made, were emphasizing it, so a good thing. And it did help to emphasize the popularity of the multicultural nature of British society. But at the end of the day, it was only a ceremony, and we can never really know how representative it was of the way that most people really felt. I think it is fair to say most people felt relatively positive about it at the time. In terms of the recent example of the death of the Queen, I don't think you can say the same thing. I don't think there was that same sense of unity behind it. I think most people, whether you agree or disagree, did feel broadly positive about the Queen herself and were sad to see her go. But I don't think you can really say that it had the same effect. Again, it's difficult because we're dealing with different time spans here. This was something that happened a few months ago. With the Olympics, you're asking, how do I remember it feeling 10 years ago? So it's quite.
And also, it's yeah. I mean, Miranda, do you have anything to add here? Like this sense of unity point?
I mean, I can't really comment because I was quite young when the Olympics were on, but I think probably, I mean, there probably was some unity in the fact that it was imposed upon us with the mourning period and the government not doing anything during the week they had off, in terms of like other issues that were going on politically. So you were kind of forced to sit and think about how you thought about the Queen. But I don't think it would have been as long lasting as the unity felt in the Olympics. I definitely remember seeing that opening ceremony, and if there was a definite like proudness to be British, you could feel amongst the crowd, and definitely that sense of unity which continued when we kept winning medals. Whereas the Queen's death was just sort of a weak event.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. Yeah, because the Olympic ceremony, like at least logically to me now, seems to me to have been a more, I don't want to say more impactful event, but yeah, like something along those lines. But it's ironic though, isn't it? Like we were talking about, like Joe was mentioning, like the Windrush generation and how the Olympic opening ceremony showed a very multicultural side of Britain. And I remember some old school conservatives like Peter Hitchens being very angry about what the opening ceremony of the 2012 Olympics showed about Britain and British society. But the thing is, like, it's still ironic because like the 2011 Tottenham riots had just happened the year before, and there were like lots of like race issues that were sort of literally burning at the time, but still people were like feeling positive for a few weeks, and that was a positive thing, most definitely. Let me just come to a slightly different but related point. When we think, or when people like us think about what the Queen symbolized, or what she what she personally like stood for, I mean, do you think anything concrete, or like as Joe was saying, like that conversation is moot whenever it might happen, because we will never get to know? Like, of course, we're never going to see her, I don't know, journals or her diaries or anything. But people do, like, if it turned out that she was, like a closet, like a closet, like insert your kind of, like insert anything horrible, like a closet, I don't know, let's say Brexiter or closet Trump supporter or whatever. Like if it turns out that she was that, would it change anything?
Oh. I don't know, it's hard to say. I mean, it would confirm a lot of people who thought they were right already. People who were quite naive about it would be in for a shock, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
But basically, I mean, if you have to ask what I think she actually thinks, I mean, you could probably just say that she was a one nation Tory, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Probably
That's
like,
what I guess,
yeah.
you know, where all the indications point to.
Mm-hmm.
But if there was somehow some evidence came to light that she definitely felt in a concrete way about this very specific issue, it's hard to say what effect that would have on people. It would just, yeah, I mean, I don't think it would cause anyone to actually change their views unless it was something truly horrendous, like that she privately believed in race science or phenology or something. I don't think it would change many people's opinions.
Yeah, okay. Miranda?
I think if she came out with quite a left-leaning socialist view, I think you'd get a lot of like typically Tory royalists sort of being like, oh well, she had that one viewpoint, but we still love her. So I think actually, and then obviously all the people who are left-wing would be like, oh, we knew we were right all along. But I think support for her would probably increase, and you might find more people who you thought were completely Republican be like, oh, actually, you know, she's actually not that bad. Like, I'm kind of sad she's gone. But then I think if it was the other way, I think that would be very divisive in people's opinions. Then again, I guess you could argue the same. People might just be like, well, you know, my grandma was a little bit racist, but she still loved me. And the Queen is the nation's grandma, so we can sort of forgive her for being a homophobe or a transphobe or something like that.
I mean, the reason I asked this question is because, let's say King Charles dies, I don't know, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, it will never go out of people's, like, I don't know, it will never go out of public memory what he felt about, let's say, climate change, or what he felt about, like, there was a time when he made some very interesting noises about, like, wellness studies. Was it wellness studies? Like, this was 2007, 2008, that sort of time. Like, there were all these memes before the term memes was a thing. Like, he could speak to trees or some bullshit
He was
like
alleged to, I don't know if it's proven, but he's alleged to have spoken to his plants.
that. Yeah. So that. So basically, I mean, this will never go out of public memory, and thanks to people like Joe, like thanks to journalists, the people will always be able to keep bringing these up, like with evidence. So, like, no matter how long he rules for, how long he stays on the crown, the day he dies, these things will be like displayed, like these things will be brought up. So my question was basically, does the fact that we knew literally nothing about Elizabeth II's personal beliefs help people to actually portray her in whatever light they felt like? And actually, we've all answered this question. Like it's definitely a yes.
Yeah, because that brings us back to the point we made at the beginning about projection.
Mm-hmm.
It's a blank slate. People can think what they want about her and imagine that she's all kinds of things. And that's the difference with Charles, which is that he's very well documented in terms of what he privately thinks and believes. We know what he thinks about environmentalism, about modern architecture.
What does he think about modern architecture?
Didn't like it.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you not know about his? He was exposed years ago that he wrote private memos to government ministers,
Right.
about his disapproval of various projects and things.
Right.
And you know about his ideal village he built?
No.
Yeah. I don't know the ins and outs of how they actually, the logistics behind it, but he organised the planning and design and building. A village called Poundbury. I can't remember where it is, but it's basically, if you look it up, you'll find it. It's built according exactly to specifications of how the ideal village should look, and it gives you a bit of an insight into him as a person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's well, I mean, I can see that happening. Well, let me just move to a different point. Actually, I have mentioned this to both of you, like in private chats. So I made this joke that I was more devastated when Sean Locke died. And the thing is, like, when someone famous passes away, be it a comedian, be it an artist, be it a mathematician, politician, whatever, you think of the ways they affected your lives, like literally. And so with Sean Locke, or with, I don't know, any number of British comedians who appear on TV quite often or quite frequently, I feel like since those videos are then put on YouTube and we can watch them whenever we want, I feel that these comedians have always helped me get through difficult times. So if tomorrow, I don't know, Rob Brydon passes away, I will feel very down because I will think of all the moments of joy that he and his comedy gave me. So, same with any kind of artist, I guess. But when people talk about the monarch, to talk about like a monarch who has just died, and they say sentences like the effect that she had on this, I mean, their life. I mean, I don't quite get what they might be meaning. And actually, like one of you, I think both of you mentioned this earlier, like she was a constant across generations. Like obviously, like that is technically a fact, but how did she exactly affect people's lives? I can't think of a concrete answer. Like maybe I can start with Miranda and then go to Joe. How did the Queen affect your life, Miranda?
I think that thing that we've discussed, it's the constant, it's the fact that people can project what they want her to be in their minds. So when she passed, I think it's just that, like, yeah, that's why, you know, they have this affinity to her.
Yeah, like I can think of, you know, sorry, Joe, like let me just say this. I can think of one case. So of course, like when the Aberfan disaster happened in the 60s, was it? Or was it the 70s?
60s.
60s, right? 66 or something?
I think so.
Yeah, so when the Aberfan disaster happened, and like, of course, this was shown on the Crown, but I knew of it beforehand as well. When the Queen, did she make a statement or she did something, something like Queen-like,
Yeah,
and people
go for ages. She didn't visit the site for a long time.
Right. So people were very appreciative of that, and so I can see why the people whose children died in the disaster could maybe say that that was one concrete way in which the British monarch like affected their lives. But yeah, anyway, Joe, how did Queen Elizabeth II affect your life?
She didn't.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're asking the wrong person, though. I mean, I didn't grow up watching the Queen's speech at Christmas. Jubilee
Hey, is it like a thing though? I know a few people who did used to watch it, but they used to all watch it like
apparently for a lot of people it's a tradition.
Like they watch it without irony?
Without irony, yeah.
Okay.
Strange thought.
Right, okay.
So if you're asking someone who had sort of you know, grown up doing that, maybe they could have said,
yeah,
you know, the same sort of thing, that she'd been a presence in their lives, but no, as you say, she wasn't for me.
I think the point that Miranda was making was very true. Like for a lot of people, she was like the constant like grandma. Like she was like the grandma, which is of course
again,
not true.
I didn't. Just asking for, you know, personal viewpoints. I didn't grow up feeling that way about it.
Yeah. When was the last time you reacted to the death of a celebrity, thinking about all the various concrete ways in which they affected your life?
Let's think. James Gandolfini.
Okay, that's a good one.
Tony Soprano.
Yeah, of course, I know James Gandolfini. Yeah.
Well,
Miranda? Yeah.
The last time I cried or felt affected.
No, not just cried. Like you reacted to the death by immediately thinking, oh, this was a moment when like they did this or they produced this album or whatever, and that album or that thing that they did affected me in a very like proper way?
I mean, probably Amy Winehouse.
Yeah. Yeah, Amy Winehouse, that's a very good one. Yeah. For me, it would be Sean Locke, obviously, like the most recent one. And I was joking to Joe that if, for example, Martin Clunes dies, I'll be devastated, like completely devastated. So yeah, for me, it will be like Amy Winehouse. I've listened to a few of her songs, but I wasn't quite into her music. I mean, when she died. But yeah, so that was
time because she was a huge star at the time, you know.
Yeah, of course, and there was this very credible backstory of her being mishandled by her agency and how they were sort of pawning her off to various. Yeah,
the same week that Michael Jackson, or around the same time Michael Jackson died.
So Jackson died August 2009.
2009, wasn't it?
A few years later. It was the same week as the shootings in Norway, if you remember those.
So Amy Winehouse's death was 2011. Yeah.
All right. So I don't know why I thought it was earlier.
Yeah, Jackson was MJ was 2009.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me come to another question now. So when you see people that are close to you, let's say professionally or like through family ties, react to something as, let's say, I would say as inconsequential or inane. I'm sorry if any of these terms offend you. But when you see people like them react to something like this in a way that you think is outright silly or outright silly, like what do? Do you try to speak to them? Like I know a friend who is literally like an arch monarchist, and he's a member of the Conservative Party. And he's a nice guy. Like he's a nice guy. Like he canvasses. He does a lot of like canvassing work for the Tory party, and he's always posting like when the Tories were having their leadership election, he was posting selfies with Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, that kind of. And in his flat in Manchester, he used to have a portrait of the Queen that he used to say goodnight to before going to bed. Yeah.
Scottish?
No, Northern.
No, sorry.
Yeah, anyway, so I thought about having a word with him, but then I thought like maybe he is not putting on a show. Maybe he is genuinely devastated. So, but anyway, like Miranda and Joe, like, did you try to speak to someone who was like that? No.
Well, I've long ago realised it's best just to let them get on with it. There's no.
Yeah.
It's just a difference in attitudes that.
Yeah.
Especially when it's all heightened around the time that she actually died, you're not gonna bridge that. At that time. So no, that my attitude is just let them get on with it.
Yeah. No, I mean, Miranda, you said your mom waited on the queue when she was at the queue for 12 hours. Was she like, what was her reaction? Was she very sad when the Queen passed?
No, I think she was doing it more for the history aspect of it.
That's a good one, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I mean, interestingly, my parents have actually met the Queen a few times at her garden party.
Wait, what?
As in the Queen, it's like not that big a deal. I think the Queen's met a lot of people, but she has a garden party in the summer, and I think they were invited because of their charity work, like a few years ago, and they'd met her like very briefly there. So I I was like, well, if you're sad about it, I could maybe understand a bit more because you'd have actually met her. So, you know, and maybe meeting the Queen really like confirms these ideas you have about her and your preconceptions. But yeah, I think, yeah, I don't know. I think
right. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like I tried to speak to someone who was, like changing their WhatsApp display picture to a picture of the Queen and all that, but he was clearly very, like he had drunk the Kool-Aid. Like he was, like we should all mourn this, mourn that. And but I mean, Joe, let me ask you a question that is probably very exclusive to your line of work, journalism. Were there any, I don't know, covert or not so covert instructions that were given to like reporters or people who write opinion pieces or journalists in general about what sort of thoughts or opinions they couldn't write or couldn't, like broadcast?
These things tend not to be put into explicit terms, but there's a general atmosphere and expectation that now is not the time for criticism.
Right. Okay.
So if, for example, I'd wanted to run a piece at the time, I don't know, quoting various people with Republican viewpoints, that probably wouldn't have, been published. But I mean, you're dealing with something a bit more sophisticated there, where it's not, explicit censorship as such.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, as I say, an atmosphere and an expectation,
Right.
and a sort of unspoken agreement that, we're not going to go there.
And how is that agreement, let's say, expressed?
Just the point would be made that not necessarily majority, but a certain hyper-vigilant section of the population will be very unhappy if you put these alternative views across, and you're likely to be inundated with complaints about it, and that people can react very strongly. I mean, the people, I'm not going to say who they are here, but the people I quoted on the day were very, very nervous about making sure their statements are absolutely perfect, and there was no angle you could come at them. It would seem like they were being critical at all.
Yeah, that is a very key point. And I can maybe ask a question about it to both of you. Like the way the politicians, like the members of parliament were reacting, it seemed like they were all trying to be extremely cautious to make sure that they wouldn't say like a word wrong. Even Jeremy Corbyn, like he made a cryptic tweet about, maybe not so cryptic, like he made a tweet about some discussions he had with the Queen about jam making.
I think that was the one, yeah, jam making.
Yes. So why do you think that was the case? Like surely, like in a democracy, people like members of parliament, elected representatives can speak their mind. Like I remember when Thatcher died.
Well, I don't want to get too Navarro on you, but it's not a democracy; it's a constitutional monarchy. But no, I think for politicians the same kind of conditions apply, which is that there wasn't any kind of formal instruction that went out, but there's a general atmosphere and an expectation that they have to keep to. And in a sense, dissenting from that is more trouble than it's worth.
Yeah.
Even the campaign group Republic, I think they stepped back a bit at the time.
Right.
Which is ironic when you think that there was never any more discussion about the royal family in the public sphere at any time than there was then. So you'd think it's the perfect time for them to make their case, but
yeah, even Sinn Féin said something. Yeah, even Sinn Féin made some very generous remarks about.
Sinn Féin has changed an awful lot in the last 20 years.
Yeah. Miranda, let me ask you this question. Like when, I mean, I know this from a different angle. Like there were a few universities who had to postpone certain events to show the world that they were in mourning. So you're a medical student. I think is it correct to say you are a pre-med person? I think in the US people have this term pre. Anyway, so I'm guessing you have to do work at some hospital. So were there things that your employer had to do to show people around him or her that he or the institution or the hospital was in mourning?
Well, I guess I was on my GP placement at the time, and they had to have the bank holiday on the Monday, so I didn't go in that day, which was good for me. But obviously, that meant the patients could have been seen and had their appointments postponed, which isn't great when the waiting list is so long.
Yeah, and other than that, there was nothing major. Yeah.
No.
Right. Yeah. And Joe, did you see anything that your paper had to do?
Totally coincidentally, I'd already booked leave for the following week, so I missed most of it. But
Right.
still, what's interesting is normal commercial incentives were sort of abandoned for those few days, where it was all wall-to-wall Queen content. Even though, and I know this because I can see the analytics and things, it wasn't doing particularly well
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah,
terms
why
of
would it?
page views,
Yeah.
because people can get that from anywhere, and
Exactly.
people do get bored of it. When you're on day 3 and the only story in town is the death of the Queen,
Yeah.
there's a small hardcore of devoted followers, but most people, they
Yeah, this
do
is a
get
very
bored
good
with these
point. I was
things.
suspecting exactly this, and maybe Miranda was suspecting exactly this as well. That is this doing well? Like, are the
No,
public still reading it? But yeah, like,
no,
thanks for
they won't.
confirming that. Yeah.
First few hours, yes. After that, it very quickly tapers off.
Right.
But
Right.
again, the expectation is still you have to keep going with it
Right.
because no one wants to be seen to be,
The odd
Be
one
the
out.
first. Yeah. Yeah. And also, when relating this to how people reacted in the aftermath of Diana's death in '97, one thing that was very, like, that sort of appealed to me was maybe there is something about the British public in general that, like, if they see something that is gonna be a part of history, they want to be part of it. Like, irrespective of whether they agree with a certain political perspective or not. So, for example, when Diana died, and there were all these people flocking outside the gates of the Buckingham Palace, sending cards, like placing like tons and tons of flowers, and addressing their like cards to Diana. People were pointing out, like sensible-minded people were pointing out that this is extremely silly. First of all, when you go to a funeral or when you go to like a memorial service, you don't uh, address your cards to the name of the person who has just passed. You address it to the family or to people that are related to the person who just passed. And there were lots of other things, like when the hearse arrived, people cheered. And so that happened in '97. And we're now in 2022. Like a generation has grown up, like an entirely new generation of people has arrived on this planet since then. But it seems like there wasn't really much of a difference in terms of the hysteria that happened then and the hysteria that happened a couple of months ago. So maybe there is something about the British pub, or maybe public in general, like irrespective of which country this is happening in. Like, if you realize that this is going to be a part of history, you want to be like an integral part of it. Like Miranda, how do you see this? Like, is this a reasonable hypothesis?
What, that we cling to history and repeating it as British?
No, no, not that. Like, if you like when you witness history, you want, like, when one witnesses history, like not just someone who is a British citizen, like anyone, anywhere, in any country. Like, if you realize this is going to be in the history books, you want to participate in it even more.
I
Does
think,
that make sense?
yeah, it does. I think, yes, but I think also uh, we really like, people really like Great Britain and British, and I think the Queen was a great part of that. So people really cling to that. I guess we're losing this Britishness as people sort of think about what does British even mean, and it's probably these ideas that we have. And as we kind of think critically and like erode away these systems, people are also nostalgic for, you know, Great Britain, and the life that was, we thought was great at the time, and the Queen passing probably, you know, was a great, you know, coming together of those ideas. So when she passed away, people want to kind of just pause and hold on to that and commemorate it and have that, you know, as this last little bit of Britishness.
Yeah, that's a neat point. Like, because I was thinking that maybe, yeah, I mean, I was trying to make it a more general remark that if this was not happening in the UK, if this was happening in, I don't know, Canada, anywhere, but maybe something similar could have happened if the
Who
person
in
who had just
Canada would
passed
have
had been
comparable
like a
status?
significant cultural icon, let's say. Sorry?
That's the thing, though. I mean, who in Canada would have, the same status?
I feel
That's a
like
good point.
everyone knows that she's worldwide, like known. I just think it's just very like it can only, and it could have only have been her and this country, really.
Yeah, like when Churchill died, there was something similar, but of course I didn't exist when it happened. I mean, he wasn't a king, and he had only been the PM for a very limited amount of time. Like he had been in politics for many, many, many years. But when Churchill died, I have read reports of something similar happening. But of course, like this fact that like the media were not exactly not allowed to talk about anything else, but were actively encouraged to not talk about anything else. These sorts of things probably didn't happen when
The case
Churchill
of
passed.
Churchill, there is an interesting comparison there because from what I read at the time, about the time, there was a general sense that it wasn't just him; it was that particular era
Mm-hmm.
that was being laid to rest because of the period when he had been PR. There was this idea of what he represented was dying along with him, and so that was the end of an era, the start of a new one. So that is where the sort of significance was drawn there, and you could argue that a lot of people would see the Queen in the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, to draw an example from a completely different realm, when Lennon died, people were shocked. And I mean, of course, it wasn't like the other Beatles members, like the other Beatles were not alive, like all of them were there. And it wasn't even like that kind of music was dying out. But no, actually, I'm
that's certain people's idea of the 60s.
No, but I'm barking up the wrong tree here because it was more a shock thing than anything else because he was like assassinated and not,
Okay, what about when the last Beatle dies, whether it's McCartney or Ringo Starr?
Yeah, that's a good question.
For the same reason.
That's a good question. Yeah. And what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, McCartney probably is the only one whose death would cause a similar, around the same extent, but would cause a similar.
If it's Ringo, it's
actions. Yeah, it'll be a bit anticlimactic if Ringo Starr's lost on the morning.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. Let me come to my last question for this episode. Miranda, when you looked at the reactions, the hysteria, and how like people from all walks of life and from many different countries, like there were many Americans who were, like as Joe was mentioning, making silly TikToks like related to the Queen. What do you think are some lessons that we might have learned from this about like the human psyche in general, or about humanity in general? Like, is there something to take stock of from what happened?
This is going to sound really mean, but people are sheep. We are all sheep.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a real lack of thinking critically. Because like you didn't know this woman. It's sad when anyone dies, but you didn't know her. And a lot of this, I think, is primed because of the way that people perceive her as someone that they know. And yeah, I guess you can mourn the constant, you can mourn the passing and the ending of an era. I do understand that. But I didn't think that warranted the sort of level of outpouring that I witnessed and saw in that week.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Just there's a need that a lot of people seem to have to project their own meaning, their own viewpoints onto events like these and people like her. It's not necessarily what the reality is. People sort of have the needs to draw certain meanings or interpretations from it, when in reality, in practical terms, it doesn't actually make very much difference to them.
Yeah. It's and this thing of not thinking critically of someone or of someone's body of work right after they have died. Like, I'm happy to report to you, Miranda, like there was this journalist, Robert Fisk. You might have known of him. So he died a couple of years ago, and Joe and I and a few other people on Twitter were as critical of him as we could have been, even on the day of his death. So yeah, that's like
Yeah.
a little moment of pride.
It wasn't any different though. He would have understood.
You would have understood. Yeah. Okay, guys. Thank you for coming on. I'm gonna stop recording now.